To the Point with Congressman Bill Pascrell, focusing on the concerns and issues facing the families of New Jersey's 8th Congressional District.
Hello, I'm Congressman Bill Pascrell, and I'd like to welcome you to this latest edition of To the Point. For the past 30 years, the United States has operated under the assumption that any trade deal is a good one. And in that time, we've watched millions of manufacturing jobs leave our shores. Last week, 3 free trade agreements were passed in Congress, one with Panama, one with Colombia, and one with South Korea. There was a lot of hype about these agreements being good for our struggling economy. The president even hosted a state dinner for South Korea's president. But now that the champagne toasts are done, what do these free trade agreements really mean for American manufacturing? How will they affect American workers and their families? With me today are 3 people to help answer those questions. John Simonelli, president of the Knickerbocker Machine Shop in Totowa, a company that started in Paterson in the 1940s. Patricia Campos-Medina is a legislative representative for the Workers United, a labor organization that represents thousands of people in the apparel and textile manufacturing industries. And Dr. Martin Gritsch is an economics professor at William Paterson University's Department of Economics, Finance, and Global Business. Thank you all for being here today. Welcome to the Point. How you doing, everyone, this morning?
Very well, thank
Well,
you.
good. I want to ask you the first question, Doctor, and it's this. What's the proper balance? We know we have to have trade. No one is saying stop our trade with the rest of the world. That would be kind of foolish, and particularly in these economic times, it would be pretty dumb. So what's the proper balance, though, on what kind of trade deals should we be getting into? What's your take on that?
If you have been following the economics news lately, what we should do to fix the economy, get it back on track, you might get the impression that economists don't agree on many things, but that's actually not the case. In a recent survey, 93% of economists surveyed indicated that they think free trade is a good thing. So that was one of the highest items in terms of the agreement reached among economists. Now, having said that, they were mainly thinking about the economic implications, what it does to GDP and so on. And I think it's important to also focus on all the other factors. There's a couple of things I'd like to mention. One is that we all know that in many foreign countries, the working conditions are not the same as in this country. It's safety standards, possibly child labor, and we have heard of cases where labor leaders were even murdered because of their activities. This is certainly not something that you could call a level playing field when compared to the standards we have in this country. The other issue is, all economists, I believe, would agree that free trade helps some areas and some sectors and hurts others, but overall the gains should be greater than the losses. The issue, however, is if you look at the individuals who lose their jobs or whole industries that are not doing as well anymore as they used to, it's not just a simple matter of switching jobs to a different profession. It may involve quite extensive training and retraining, and it also involves some personal hardships when individuals are forced off with their families to uproot them and move them to a different part of the country.
So, Pat, go ahead.
If I can jump into this question, because I think it's important to understand that those of us who have been working on the free trade, fair trade movement for a long time have been saying that what's wrong with our trade policy today is our trade model, which is based on the model of the NAFTA trade agreement, which basically gives greater rights to corporations to protect their investments and to protect their intellectual property than it gives to workers and the environment. The enforcement mechanisms on our current trade model, which once again is modeled after the NAFTA trade agreement, is that while corporations can defend their investments when they go to other countries, they can actually, they do not face any penalties if they go and ruin the environment in other countries.
Really.
There's no monitoring, and like he mentioned, there's no standards for labor rights. We basically get into a situation that we are trading off our jobs with countries with labor standards that are partly compared to ours.
Then what did you think, Pat, of the deal we worked out? Because once you go on the Ways and Means Committee, everything goes through our committee. And trade is a major part of it, taxes, you name it, Social Security. Once you get on the Ways and Means Committee, everyone else says, oh, you're going to have to drink the Kool-Aid. Now, what's the Kool-Aid? The Kool-Aid is that you got to vote for every trade deal, which I haven't, when you're on the committee, because you're looking at it from a strictly economic business point of view. That's a very legitimate point of view, but it's not the only point of view. Now, we worked very hard, Charlie Rangel, Sandy Levin, myself, and other people, to make the Peruvian deal, which was one of the FTAs, one of the free trade agreements that we had was brought to the Obama administration for them to look at. We've been looking at 4 or 5 of these trade deals over the last 4 or 5 years. What we insisted upon with the Peruvian government is that there be very strong labor conditions, that there be workers' rights pronounced, environmental issues had to be addressed beforehand. Peru agreed to all of these things before we even got to debate it in the Congress of the United States. I thought that that was a new protocol to be, that's why I voted for the Peruvian deal. That would be a new protocol for us to try to fit into every trade deal. I'm very suspect of the word free trade because it implies to me, as I've seen in my job as a congressman, it implies that whatever they send over pass. Don't forget these free trade deals, we cannot change. Once they're on the table, once they're debated, there are no amendments. It gives tremendous amount of power to the executive branch of government. Did you agree with the Peruvian deal?
I think the Peruvian deal was a step in the right direction. It had some of the mechanisms that we were in the fair trade movement were asking for, that environmental and labor rights be enforceable by actually penalizing countries that don't comply. That's the problem. We talk about including, even in Colombia trade agreement right now, they talk about making steps towards improving labor rights, but there's no penalties if they don't. You know, we force countries under our current trade policy, if they don't meet intellectual right, proper international intellectual, we penalize them. We take away their trade privileges. If
no,
they
with
don't
China,
meet,
though.
no,
they
with China,
get away
yes.
with murder.
Right.
We'll get to China in a
But the
while.
Peruvian was a good step forward. The same with the Jordan trade agreement under the Clinton administration. It was a step forward. It is shameful that this administration chose not to go that far. And you know, when the Obama administration decided to just leave the agreements as they were negotiated under the Bush years, it basically said that they were not willing to go to follow the model of at least the Peruvian trade agreement.
Some have criticized the president as simply more of the same in terms of the Bush administration. I think there's been a major attempt to try to change these deals, but certainly not enough for me. I voted against South Korea and I voted against Colombia for very specific reasons. And those reasons to me are important enough, just as important, in fact more important, than all of the economical possibilities. And by the way, we've had a lot of promises about these trade deals over the last 20, 30 years. And you know what? I've looked at every one of them. Not only NAFTA was a disaster, but most of the deals have been disasters because either they weren't monitored, we didn't follow up on what we were supposed to do, American people were displaced, and that's one of the reasons why we passed the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act to help those workers who are displaced. What's your take on it, John?
Well, the question I was going to ask is, and you just mentioned the word monitoring, how does one monitor, even if countries promise that they're going to abide by certain things? How do we really know that they're doing it, or we just have to ultimately take their word for it?
Right.
Yeah.
We want people to buy our products. That makes jobs in the United States of America. But when you look at the balance, too many people are displaced. And then trying to help those people is after the fact. It seems to me what we should be trying to do is increase exports, which the President has laid out, I think, very succinctly. But at the same time, protect those industries that are being hurt. I don't have to tell you about the textile industry. That didn't happen last week. It didn't happen last year. It happened like 25 years ago when we kind of surrendered this. All the goods that have come into our country. Hard-working people in our cities. City I lived in all my life, Paterson, New Jersey. Textile capital, Silk City of the world. And what happened? Displaced. And those workers got no new training for new jobs. They were just out of work. and then we saw the whole industry go down the tubes, and we saw the whole industry disappear, not only in New Jersey, folks moving to North Carolina so they didn't have to put up with unions. And then you saw what happened to those companies.
Right.
They went to Jabib. They went out all over the place. The unions weren't the problem. We're the problem not having established the policy.
I think that the biggest problem that we're going to have to face as a country in the short term and long term is that we really don't have a manufacturing policy in this country. We're sort of given up on it. And the president talks about creating jobs. I think the strongest countries that are able to sustain long-term economic growth have investments in manufacturing so that we're able to produce and make some goods. And I'm not saying go back to the basic, putting things together, but encourage businesses like I'm sure our colleague here that want to stay in the United States, that want to produce goods in the United States, be profitable. But if you put him to compete with a factory, let's say in Mexico or in Korea, that doesn't have to live up to the basic labor standards of not having children work in the factory or having, then he's at a disadvantage.
Right.
How do we encourage him to stay in business?
We're almost dumbing down the process, going to the cheapest labor. Now look, you're a corporation, you want to get your product made as cheap as possible. That's why many of these companies have gone to other parts of the United States. Then after that, they went into South America, Central America. Then after that, they went to China. They're going to go to the Balkans. They're going to go all over the place to protect their dollar. But the fact is that that's becoming more expensive for them to do now. So some people are looking back to place of origin, back to the United States. How does that affect your industry? Don't forget, I grew up on your street.
Right.
In Paterson, maybe that's why you moved. But anyway, Knickerbocker Avenue in Paterson is Knickerbocker Industries.
Right.
And I know exactly where you guys were. I was up the street towards Clifton more, but I was in Paterson. And you've had a business since the 40s. That's an amazing thing in the United States of America today. Right. How did you survive, John?
Well, a couple of wars along the way helped us, but ultimately we had to find niche products where the total usage or volume is small enough that the foreign competition is not going to be interested in it.
I see.
So you find these niche markets for these niche products,
right.
Highly specialized items. In our case, we're in the metals business. It would
right.
be finding more, making the same item but with more exotic metals, or else making some new items to spec. We started out as a machine shop. We still are able to be a machine shop where people could come to us with specific designs and we could bid on them. But we found that our product line, which is our lifeblood, there's been more and more competition,
right.
more and more foreign competition, and so we've gotten less and less share of the...
So where's the foreign competition? Where's it coming from? For your industry. You got a machine shop.
Right.
You employ how many people?
Well, when 20 years ago we employed over 90 people. We're down to about 60 people right now.
Speaks for itself.
Right.
Where's your biggest competition?
Our biggest competition now is China.
Is China.
China, followed by India.
Now, how does China get its products into the United States at such a... We know what they pay their workers,
right.
Chinese companies, or the Chinese government, rather, which is another issue we're going to come to.
Right.
Subsidizing your manufacturers, which we have to put up with, this country. We're not playing on a level playing field, are we?
No, not remotely.
Tell me how we're not.
Well, we have regulations that they do not have. They have, as far as we understand, they have restrictive tariffs that we don't have.
Right.
We favor bringing stuff in from China. They basically, they're working with cheap labor.
Right.
I mean, that's the bottom line. Cheap labor, no or little or no environmental regulations.
And as in all over the world in the history, particularly in the 20th century, and now in the 21st century, people get fed up.
Yeah.
And the Chinese people get fed up. And you hear more and more every day that the workers are clamoring for a fair wage.
Exactly.
The workers are clamoring that they don't have to be locked into a factory in the morning to make Walmart products. Don't get me off on that.
Right.
But the point is, China's not the only country about this. And you know, one of the things that really annoyed me about the South Korea deal is one of the reasons why I voted against it. And of course, it passed overwhelmingly. One of the things that really annoyed me was that transshipment problem, where something, let's take an automobile. Well, we're going to be sending more automobiles to South Korea, which is good for us. However, we've opened up trade to them on textiles. This is, remember, free trade agreement means you're coming in with no tariffs whatsoever. Okay? So we're allowed to increase the amount of cars we ship over to South Korea, which where we've been suckers for 30 years in terms of the automobile business. But they can bring anything into this country. Now, if they're making a car, 60% of that, 65% of that car can be made in China, sent through South Korea, and then come here.
And it's the same for light manufacturing.
Exactly. If that is being done, and it's been done in other products, in other trade deals, then how do we really protect our workers? And isn't this simply praying at the altar of corporate America rather than protecting our workers? We know there's got to be trade. But how do we stop this? That to me was a major, and the origin, where's the origin of this car? This car's being made mostly in another country, and China's taking advantage of it by going through South Korea in order to have it duty-free in the United States of America. I think that's preposterous. I proudly voted against that. Did I do the right thing?
Absolutely.
Why did I do the right thing? Why do you say that?
Because it's sort of a secret that many of us know that even though the agreement is made with one country, we're really back to square one, where we're really making still another agreement with China.
Professor, transshipment, origin of product. It's a major issue in a lot of countries that are shipping and free trade agreements, the FTAs. They're getting into this country duty-free. What do you think about that?
It's clearly not in the spirit of these agreements, and I think it's interesting what you've been mentioning from the political perspective. It's not what it sounds like on the surface, and as you were saying, a lot of countries are smart enough, and it doesn't take too much problem to figure out how to get around that. And clearly what we end up with is not what the spirit of the agreement was.
Do we give up these industries, Pat, like textiles? We just say, well, they'll have to do something else. It's not just that. It's giving up our will to manufacture and make things. That's what I'm very, very concerned about. This is like one of the final nails into the apparel, into the textile business. They're going the way of the leather business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. I think that us in the apparel and textile industry has been at the brunt, has suffered the brunt of basically giving up an entire industry. Basically saying, oh, China can make it cheaper, let's take it over there, and Americans will find another job. But the bottom line is that we as a government policy, as a policy, have to create other industries for people to move into, and we have to train them and create the venues to that. We're not doing that anymore. I would tell you that the few jobs that still exist on apparel and manufacturing are in the high technology area, have been because companies have to be able to be resourceful and get into what they call niche, but areas that are high technology. The Chinese cannot do the high-end production. They cannot do yet because they concentrate on the high-level production area. But every year, government is investing less and less in that type of technology development. I mean, in the textile industry, we fight every year for funding for research in universities to help companies keep up with technology so they can use better. Every year we have to do that.
Most folks in America don't understand how these countries subsidize their industries. You know, the big battle between Hamilton and Jefferson was, you know, Jefferson thought we would be an agrarian society for decades, if not centuries. Hamilton said we got to have, that's when he brought the tools and the machinery from England to Paterson, New Jersey, and with one T, and brought it to Paterson, New Jersey, and started manufacturing, became the first industrial city in the United States of America to make things. He won the battle. he won the battle.
You know,
he got shot, but he won
Yeah,
the battle.
Another thing that we have to fight every year, for example, we are losing our capability as a country to supply our own resources to our military. Every year, like our Buy American laws in the Defense Department, we have to defend them because there's people in Congress, some of your colleagues, and paid off by some companies who say U.S. Only for the Defense Department is too expensive. But yet, now we're going to go buy not just this uniform for the soldiers, but our supplies from China. And so we're dependent on our own supply for our defense.
God forbid we ever have to go to a major war. We probably have to buy our tanks from China. I mean, think about that.
The implications
think about the demoralization of the American worker who had a good paying manufacturing job and now has to look for a service job at McDonald's at best. We need to train them. Now, we do have the trade, as I mentioned before, the trade adjustment assistance. That was one of the things that the president insisted upon, thank God, that we would reauthorize that trade assistance to help workers retrain for other industries if they're laid off because of a trade agreement. We've had thousands of people in many parts of this country. That's correct. We've lost a lot of jobs. And you know what's interesting? You mentioned NAFTA earlier. I found out that the Mexican farmers were hurt with that deal as well. So we want a trade deal that helps both sides, that levels the playing field, that makes it so that we can compete. You can't compete with another industry in another country if that industry is being subsidized, paid off by their government. But you know what? This is about jobs, jobs and more jobs. And if it doesn't create jobs to me, we shouldn't even be talking about it. There's no guarantee that these trade deals, particularly with Colombia, are going to trade, have these deals. We've seen what's happened to the labor folks down in Colombia. They've been shot. The new government under President Sanchez is no different than the past government. One person was indicted for the last 28 murders. I mean, we have values in America. We can't simply be dealing with corporation to corporation or corporation to country. We have to step in and say, enough is enough.
I think that one of the biggest problems on trade agreements also is that we usually use the term, we cannot force countries to change their policies against their workers. I mean, it's their prerogative to do it. Yet, we force them every step of the way to change the laws to benefit the investment rights of corporations and the intellectual property rights, well, we should. But what we're saying is if workers in Colombia want to have a union to demand a better wage, they should. It's a human right to be able to associate freedom. But in Colombia, if you associate, you use your right, you get killed. 51 killings just last year, and none of them have been brought to justice.
Many of the proponents of these free trade deals say, well, look, you can't force countries to do anything. Oh, you can't?
We do it every day.
We do it every day, Depends on the country, right?
One of the major ways to create jobs in this country would be to get China, one of our big trade partners, more importantly than that, to straighten out their currency. They've manipulated the currency. Our trade adjustment thing is horrible with China. We've lost a lot of jobs. If China straightens out its currency situation, it would lead to the creation of 1.5 million jobs. Now, the president in his plan is talking about 1,800,000, 1,900,000. This one action, why don't we have the courage to stand up to the Chinese? And we want to be friendly. We want to have trade with China. But we don't want to be saps. And deals that have been made 5, 10, 20 years ago, we've been saps. We've drained the blood and the energy out of manufacturing in this country, and that's wrong. The good-paying jobs. So we want people to go out and, we want people to go out to the fast food stores and get a clerk's job. And how long is that going to last? And how long can we do that? That's why the trade adjustment assistance is important, to get folks to retrain for other jobs. A lot of these jobs are not going to come back, are they, John?
No, but part of it is we have to change the mindset here, too. Unfortunately, it's been our experience in the years we've been around that people's attitude toward manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing, in this state particularly, manufacturing equals dirty. or manufacturing, you don't want to get your hands dirty. Everybody
Can
needs.
you imagine our kids?
Yeah.
What do you want to be? I want to go in the machine shop.
Right.
I want to go to the looms.
Right.
I want to go make a car. What? You're not
Yeah,
going to
right.
go to college?
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of folks are going to college that maybe shouldn't be going to college. Could be more productive to themselves, into the community, into the country, if they got their hands dirty once in a while.
I think that the
Is that what you mean,
Yeah,
John?
that's exactly what I mean.
the
yes.
mindset is that the jobs, those used to be good paying jobs. And families used to be able to raise and
Right.
go up to the middle class with a good manufacturing job, but they're not anymore. So I mean, most of folks want to, go to college because they want to get a good paying job, and that's now the way to make it to the middle class.
Right.
But we have changed what it means to have a manufacturing
And
job.
we've shrunk the
We
middle
shrunk
class
the middle
because of
class,
that.
Exactly.
That were the good paying jobs when people had
Right.
hope to go up the ladder.
Right.
So look, we're for trade. We want it to be fair, more than free, because we've gotten shafted with free deals with many of these countries. Our folks have lost jobs. Middle class people have lost their jobs. Trade deals must reflect our values. And our values are very clear. We want good paying jobs for our people that don't last just 1 year and, of course, end. And so we can come to some agreement on this.
And-
I hope we're going in the right direction. Do you sense we are? Do you think we've changed in the past 10 years? Very quickly, what do you think? Doctor?
I think very often these decisions are made based on what the current need is, and maybe not with too much.
And not
planning
long
ahead.
run.
Yeah.
And not long run.
I
Pat?
think that's often the case.
I think that if the civil society, if we keep demanding that that workers' rights and environmental rights are
Right.
respected and included as enforceable parts of agreements, and we demand that the Obama administration, as he moves forward and negotiates our next trade deals, which
Right.
is the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that he actually keeps his promise to include this agreement. I think we're going to get there, but it's up to us to demand
John,
change.
thank you.
I think we should focus more on the big picture than on what's politically expedient.
John, thank you for being here today. Pat, thank you for being here. Doctor, you're a good reflection of William Paterson University. Thank you for being here. I wish we had
My
more
pleasure.
time. Thank you for watching this edition of To The Point. You've heard our thoughts. Now I would like to hear what you think about today's show. If you have any comments, concerns, or questions, stay tuned. Our address, phone number, and website address will appear in a moment. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time on To The Point.